Future, the medical marijuana debate and medical panel. Today, I know we're running late, so I'm going to start quickly and introduce everyone. First, I want to just give attention to our Chancellor, Dr. Fred Lippman. And our amazing Dean, Dr. Daziel. I'll start with our moderator, Andrew Abramson from the Sentinel. We have Ben Pollara, the campaign manager of United for Care and Amendment 2. We have Representative Den Baxler, Florida House of Representatives, and about to become senator. Representative Joseph Geller, Florida House of Representatives, partner at Greenspoon and Marder. And my good friend Barney Bishop, CEO of Florida Smart Justice Alliance. On our medical panel, we have Dr. Jose Valdez of our College of Pharmacy. Robert Speth, Ph.D. professor at NSU and research affiliate of the Institute. And he just became a Provost Research and Scholarship Award recipient. And we have Dr. Block from anesthesiologist and also naturopath, world renowned. And we'll take this moment to start. I appreciate everybody coming today. And Andrew, the floor is yours.
All right. Appreciate being here. This is obviously an amendment. There's a lot of interest. I mean, you see the TV channels are here. This is being streamed live both on Nova's site and on the Sun Sentinel website. So, you know, when you hear marijuana, it brings up a lot of passionate responses from both sides, medical marijuana included. So this is a great opportunity for us to talk to the yes side and the no side, for them to debate, and for the voters to ultimately decide in just a couple of weeks. I know absentee ballots are already out. Early voting starts Monday, so this is happening right now. I do ask the speakers if you could just make sure you speak into the mics, otherwise we won't pick this up on the stream, so that's important. And if you could keep your answers to about 1 minute, and then each side can rebut for 30 seconds. Generally, when I ask a yes or no side, either of you can respond unless I want to direct a question at one of you specifically. And you know, let's have a good discussion here. So let's open up. Let's have a quick opening statement from each side. We'll start with the yes side. You know, 1 minute. Just tell us why you're here and about this amendment and why voters should pass it.
Well, thank you all for having us here today and hosting this event. Always an honor to join Representative Joe Geller on the stage. It's always weird when I'm sitting to the left of Joe, which doesn't happen very often. So I appreciate you all entertaining this conversation. This really isn't a particularly controversial conversation, although it is one that people like to have because it may be a little entertaining, but not particularly controversial. The notion that we are proposing and what is on your ballot here as Amendment 2 again this November is that medical decisions should be made between doctors and their patients, and they should be made in the doctor's office without the interference of politicians. And so that's what's on the Florida ballot, and that is not a particularly controversial proposition, which is why our internal polls show the amendment passing with 77%. The Florida Chamber of Commerce shows it passing with somewhere around 73%. And we actually, you know, the cliche is the only poll that matters is Election Day. We got a huge majority of the vote in 2014 of almost 58%. So I am confident that this amendment will pass this November, and I'm confident of it because the people of Florida believe that it should pass. They know that people are sick and suffering here in the state. They know that marijuana is medicine, and it works, and it has worked for thousands and thousands of years, and it is a relatively safe medicine that has never killed anybody in the history of human civilization, and they know that it works in 25 other states plus DC, and that Florida should be the next state to have a compassionate medical marijuana law like Amendment 2.
Thank you. No side.
Good morning. I am Dennis Baxley, state representative from Ocala, and I've served in the legislature off and on since 2000, and I'm getting ready to go to the Senate. So I've looked at this policy discussion many times. In my opening statement, I basically want to offer you two things to consider. First of all, we're not talking about the efficacy of cannabis or whether it has any medical value. The debate is, do you want this in your state constitution as a provision? That's the difference. I would hold to you that we have gotten pigs and trains and all kinds of policy and all kinds of appropriations stuck into the state constitution. The state constitution is the defining document of a relationship of the people and their government. That is its purpose, not to set policy about marijuana or anything else. It's to set that framework. And if anything, I hope the next commission has the courage to pull a lot of this stuff out of the Constitution, and let's address it in the way that we address policy in this state and throughout this country, and that is through a representative democratic republic. That's how we set policy in America. And what we're doing with this constitutional amendment is turning everything on its head and doing it backwards. We need to build policy. First of all, you're putting something in the state constitution that's in direct conflict with federal law. So you're opening the door to litigation. And everyone will use this constitutional right or standing or position. When we have an ongoing issue, we all agree that we need to handle the relationship with cannabis different than we're handling it. And this is going to be a process. I want to address one other thing. What is that? That's water, right? Now, I could call that medical water because if I'm dehydrated, it could save my life. So this is medical water. Marijuana is marijuana. It doesn't become something different by applying this label. It's an effort to legitimate it without it going through the same process as we do, and an imperfect process it is. You don't want us approving drugs by popular vote or approving drugs on the House floor by a bunch of people who have not done the science, do not know the background, and yet they're setting policy. Now, I'll admit to you that there are some great political arguments about some of the problems with the way we approve drugs in this country. And there are legitimate discussions to be had. But the reaction is not that you put it in the state constitution. This is the wrong way. The research needs to come first, and the laws that make it an illegal substance need to change at the federal level, and we need to work out the processes of how we deal with the policies related to the use of marijuana for medical or other reasons. And what you're seeing is really, just because something is popular doesn't mean it's right. Thinking people have to stop. Now that has a nice ring to it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to get into some of this. We got to move on. That was opening statement. We'll get into a lot of these issues as we go on.
Don't put it in your Constitution, please.
So let me get to the first question.
can I
No,
respond to
no,
that
no.
statement?
No, this was opening statements. So, and we'll go over a lot of those topics in these questions. So, first question, I just added this one in today because this is something that's happening right now, a little news here, and this is for the yes side. There's been several reports in Broward County that Amendment 2 has been missing in the vote-by-mail ballots sent out to voters. Have you heard about this issue beyond what's been reported in the Sun Sentinel? And how much does this concern you? I know in Broward, Broward voted for medical marijuana 64% in 2014. I'm guessing higher than most counties.
I think it was 68.
I think it was 64 in Broward, but okay, go on. Have you heard about this beyond?
I've been saying 68 for a while. So, yeah, no, listen, we've heard about it, and actually we have in the audience Karen Goldstein, who's the chairman of Normal Florida, who she and Norm Kent filed a lawsuit against the Broward supervisor yesterday to make sure that people's votes get counted and heard in this election. But from what I'm hearing this morning, and we've had our deputy campaign manager at Dr. Snipes' office since they opened this morning, is that it seems, and from what we're hearing prior to that, it seems very isolated. The supervisor's office is saying they believe, they're not 100% sure, they believe it is limited to about 7 ballots. but we don't know yet, and so it remains a concern, obviously. And so we're continuing to monitor it, and hopefully we'll get some more clarity by the end of the day. But it does not appear to be a huge issue.
Is that anything you want to address?
No, I think we really need to look at what's going on with the election process in terms of the total credibility. I have worked on election law, and I do think it's very important that we have a credible result. We're going to have very close elections in fall. Every election in Florida is going to be tight because we have people here from all over the world and all over the country, and they all have different perspectives they bring to this process. The one thing we as legislators must do, and as a government, is at least have a process by which, however it comes out, people have reason to take credibility in the result. And so I'm for anything that helps that happen.
Okay, this is for the no side. Do you believe that cannabis with THC, not the low-grade Charlotte's Web, but cannabis with THC has medicinal benefits?
Okay, does low THC have medicinal
No.
benefits?
The cannabis with the higher THC level.
Oh.
Do you believe it has medicinal benefits?
That's a very good question. I think that it potentially can. I think what's important for the audience to know is that the Florida legislature 2 years ago heard what the people of Florida wanted, what a majority wanted, not what 60% wanted, but what a majority wanted in marijuana, and they put it into law. So now this constitutional amendment has got 9 diseases listed. 9 diseases. So what happens if 3 years from now there's research that shows 4 more diseases should be added? You know what happens? You have to do a whole new constitutional amendment. You can only wait every other year. So it's better that medical marijuana is in statute because it doesn't cost millions of dollars to put a constitutional amendment together, and it can be done every year versus every other year.
So your response to the question is you believe it may have medicinal benefits?
I think that it can for those people that believe that, yes. I think, I say that there's the power of positive thinking is very important. Look, why do people go to Mexico and do alternative medicine treatments? Because they think that it will help them. I will just say this, that, look, I've smoked more marijuana than all of you people in this room combined. Look at me. I'm from the 60s and the 70s. I went to school in Miami. I went to school in Boston. So what do you think I did? Okay? But you know what? If you look at the latest Harvard study, 91% of the people in America don't get addicted to pot. 91%. But that means that 9% do. And do you know how many billions of dollars you as taxpayers and I are paying for that 9%? We're spending $2 billion plus in corrections. We're spending over $1.5 billion in children and families.
Okay, and we'll get back to some of that.
And we're spending over $1 billion in juvenile justice. That's a lot of money.
You want to rebut there?
I mean, I don't even know where to begin on rebutting the numerous logical fallacies that was in Barney's last answer here. But let's just start with...
Does everyone on the panel here have their cell phones off? Trying to figure out where that sound is coming from?
Let's just begin with his answer to the basic premise of the question, which does marijuana have medicinal benefit? And he potentially could. Barney, you just said you smoke more marijuana than anybody in this room. You know it has medical benefit. This stuff works, and we know it from thousands and thousands of years of human history. Saying marijuana could potentially have medicinal benefit is like saying, yeah, maybe climate change is happening as the king tides are flooding into Miami Beach. Okay,
I don't believe in that either.
Of course you don't. I guess at least you're consistent in your willful ignorance. Marijuana unquestionably has medicinal benefit, and in fact, there was a archaeological discovery just a few weeks ago in China of a 3,000-year-old body buried with marijuana leaves. There was previously a similar discovery in Siberia a few months ago of a 2,500-year-old body woman's body buried with marijuana leaves, and they believed that she had died from breast cancer and that she was treating her breast cancer 3,000 years ago with cannabis. So it absolutely is medicine, has medicinal benefit. That is not up for debate, despite what Barney says.
That actually leads me to the next question for the yes side. The Florida Medical Association, which represents more than 20,000 physicians in our state, passed a resolution opposing the amendment. Their CEO said, quote, "There is nothing medical about this proposal, and the lack of scientific evidence that pot is helping in treating medical conditions is far from inclusive. If the state's leading medical association is against it, then why should voters be in favor of it?"
Well, Joe deals with the FMA on a daily basis, so maybe he has insight into that particular psychology. But listen, we have doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals supporting this campaign all over the state. We may not have the endorsement from the Florida Medical Association. We have the endorsement from the SEIU, which is the largest organization of doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers in the state of Florida, both current and retired. And poll after poll has shown that doctors believe this stuff is medicine, and patients believe that it works for them. So I'm sorry that the FMA has not come around on this issue, but the bottom line is doctors and patients support medical marijuana, and the core of this issue is about giving that option to doctors and their patients. And if they don't want to take it, they don't have to. But it's about providing another treatment option to doctors in the state of Florida.
To you on the Florida Medical Association question.
Well, clearly, I can tell you why, because it's a backwards process. I mean, maybe apple pie is good for you, but you don't have the science. We don't know the dosage. When I was down here in college, the dope that was being smoked in the 70s and right after that period, today what's on the street is 20 times the strength of this. We don't have sourcing, we don't have any kind of standards, we don't have any kind of testing of blind studies to see what it does and doesn't do. Yeah, we can see some anecdotal evidence, and yes, we can hear some rudimentary kind of science that's done by people who want to spread the dope. But the fact is, we don't know the scientific picture, and this is not the way to make scientific decisions that are healthy for America. You're asking us to make a policy change in the Constitution of the state of Florida without any of this background buildup as to direction of how this whole industry will be applied. And here's the problem for me.
Actually, we're going to get to
It's an avalanche. It's an avalanche towards just open recreational use, and you need to study California, you need to study Colorado, and the total impacts.
Remember, please keep the rebuttals to around 30 seconds. Now,
Well, I don't remember you cutting him off. I'm going to have to do the Donald Trump thing here. Now, if you want me to come talk about this stuff, you got to give me equal time.
to keep this short.
Tough to keep a politician from filibustering.
Let me ask, you talk about the Constitution, but doesn't it, if it gets to a point where the majority of voters, residents in a state want something and the legislature isn't being responsive, then doesn't it get to a point where if they're not going to the will of the people, then the people do have to take a stance and put it in the Constitution?
And you're directing that to us?
Yes.
Sure. No, I absolutely think that's correct. But remember that we have a law that says that for something to be in the Constitution, you need to have a supermajority. So it requires a 60% vote. Now, Ben wants to convince you that this is going to pass. Don't necessarily believe that. Why? Because I was involved in this debate as he was 2 years ago when this amendment came up the first time. You know what the first poll said? 88% of the people want to smoke pot, okay? 88%. It lost on election day with 58%, 30 points down. So take as 77%, it's only 17%. And who knows if millennials are even going to go and vote. They may be so disgusted with this election as many of us are. That being the case, in the Constitution, you don't get the opportunity to change it but every 2 years, and it costs millions of dollars. So if you find more diseases that marijuana does help, you're not going to be able to get it done very easily.
Let me ask
The
you this,
reason why it's in, the reason why you want it in the Constitution is because The proponents want to make it a constitutional right. It doesn't need to be. It's already in statute. You can already
Let me
get
ask you
medical
this,
pot
follow
today.
up to this. At what point do the people have the right, if they don't feel their legislators are being responsive?
Well, I think no is a response, that you don't have it right, and this is not the way to do it. And yes is a response, and he's just talked about 2 pieces of legislation. The fact is, we're opening a Pandora's box when we put in the Constitution. We can work through this statutorily and make changes as we learn, but I can't fix it for you, a process like that, if it's set in the Constitution. It will be a very narrow framework with which we have to do implementing bills.
30 seconds, please.
No. I'm going to not filibuster, but I ain't going to do it in 30 seconds, so please forgive me.
Well, do it as quickly as you
All
can,
right.
both sides. We got a lot of questions to get to.
Thank you. But let me just say that, first of all, since the first time I've gotten this, I do want to thank the college. I want to thank the university. I want to thank Dr. Kjelson. I want to thank the chancellor and the dean. I also want to thank my old friend Barney Bishop, my colleague, and my good friend Mr. Pollara, and you. I think it's important that we're having this discussion. I think it's, regardless of what any of us say up here, for people to be able to hear the give and take, I think is very important. Now, on this particular issue, I think we're really missing the point on putting it in the Constitution. I have to say, when I heard my esteemed colleague talking about decisions being made by people who didn't know what they were doing, who didn't have information, who had no scientific background, and had no ability to distinguish between one kind of drug and another, I thought he was describing the legislature. That said,
That too.
that said, I actually had a bill that didn't even get a hearing in the last session, because there's a better way to do this than we are, and a lot of states do it. It shouldn't be a choice between seeing if my colleagues will do the right thing, which unfortunately a lot of times doesn't happen, or having to put it in our state constitution. And I had a bill that said that the citizens of this state ought to have the right to adopt a law by referendum, the same as is done in many other states, notably California, but a lot of others. And it shouldn't have to be a choice of put it in the Constitution or stand powerless. Our state constitution says all power resides in the people.
Let me ask you about Mr. Geller's statement that he couldn't even get a bill.
Well, that's why we have elections, and they're...
Let me just add one thing before. The other logical fallacy, if you put these 9 diseases in the Constitution, and next year, once it's accepted, once people see it's working, they do find 4 more, wouldn't surprise me. There's nothing that says the legislature cannot adopt something that also allows those other diseases to be prescribed. Just because only 9 are enshrined in the Constitution, that does not mean we're powerless to act as legislature. But the bottom line is the people are the ones who get to make this decision. When the legislature won't act, this is the right of the people to do. That's why there is this process. And if I had my way, we could also adopt laws, not only constitutional amendments. Now I'm done.
I'd like you to, well, hold on one second. No, we're going to go back and forth. I want to ask you to respond to a couple of statements he just made. One, that he couldn't even get a bill on the floor for this. And 2, yes, once this passes, couldn't the state legislature add diseases without having to go back into another constitutional amendment?
Well, the fact is, the legislature is the people. This is why we have elections, so you can send people to make these decisions in your behalf. I don't have a seat in the House. My constituents do. I sit there for them. If they don't like the decisions I'm making for them, then they elect someone else. This is the way it happens, and we face electorate every 2 years. So when I say, well, the people wanted this and the legislature wouldn't do it, well, the legislature is the representative voice of the people, so I always say, which people? This is why we have a legislature, so you can have, this is how 20 million people have a conversation who come from all over the world and have different views. So I would just say no one has a right to have their bill heard. There's a process by which they get evaluated by committees and committee chairs, and then ultimately about 10% actually get passed. And you're probably very fortunate that 90% of them don't get passed, because by the time you weighed all the unintended consequences and how much freedom you had left, you'd be for getting rid of a few more laws. Matter of fact, I'm not sure that in what this discussion is about. Maybe we're approaching it totally wrong. Maybe we should just stop regulating marijuana at all rather than putting it in the Constitution as some kind of medication.
Now let me ask you this. Let me ask a follow-up here on something you just said. You said, you know, the people, that the legislators are the representative of the people. Now, I understand a constitutional amendment needs 60%, but people have voted on it, and 57% said they wanted it. So, isn't it, though I think the majority of people have spoken in the state, the majority, over 50%, have said that they do want it. So, isn't it the responsibility of the lawmakers, once again, who represent the people?
Well, you're really talking about a philosophy of direct democracy. We could have no legislature and just put everything on ballots. But that's not proven to be the best process for having this discussion. A legislature is the way to have this discussion, and sticking things in the Constitution that are not about the relationship of the people and their government, but there are policy issues that you elect people to work on, and you go and tell them when you don't like it, and you can protest at the Capitol, and you can lobby for his bill. How many of you came up and lobbied for his bill? Anybody come up and lobby for it? Okay. Well, that's the process.
You wanted to say on this side?
I mean, the notion that the legislature is the people is horribly wrong, because if it were true, the people would be terrible at their job. Okay, this is a legislature that not only failed us on medical marijuana, that 58%. I don't know how you could have a clearer voice of the people than a vote of a 58% majority. And I think it's insulting to say to the people of Florida, you know, come up and lobby for it if you wanted it. No, they lobbied for it by casting their vote for it, by expressing their right to franchise in support of this constitutional amendment.
That's not what his bill did, by the way.
I didn't interrupt you, Representative.
I'm just answering it. His bill didn't.
Please, no interrupting, both sides.
Please. And you know, let's talk about where the legislature failed us in the 2015 session after medical marijuana was on the ballot. They failed us on medical marijuana. They failed us on Medicare expansion. They failed us on passing a budget. Oh, but by the way, they doubled the size of beer growlers. So we got that done. You can have a 64-ounce beer growler now. Listen, the notion that the legislature is the people is as ridiculous as the notion that the Florida Constitution is this sacred document. You know, somehow like our United States Constitution, like the Bill of Rights. Representative Baxley said it in his opening statement. We've got pregnant pigs, we got trains, we got, you know, there's two more, you know, silly little tax cuts that you all put on the ballot this year. Or there's another, you know, property tax cut for veterans or something like that.
Okay, we're gonna
these silly things on the Constitution all the time. So this is not a sacred document. And we can talk about the philosophical, you know, good government policy of you know, representative democracy versus direct democracy. But the fact of the matter is, these are the rules of the game. This is the rules of the state of Florida. This is how,
okay. We're going to move on. We have more questions
do laws in
to
the
get
state.
to. Okay. Next questions for the yes side. The yes side has repeatedly said the loopholes that existed in the failed 2014 amendment have been eliminated. Yet the no side says it will be easy to game the system. They talk about PTSD as a prime example, arguing that a doctor could recommend cannabis to a high school senior who has anxiety over a test. I heard athlete's foot mentioned on their side, something, oh, that could give you, you know, stress and you could get it for that. What's to stop a sympathetic doctor from recommending cannabis to just about anybody based on how he or she interprets the law?
Well, for one thing, there's the Board of Medicine that does regulate doctors and makes sure that they're not acting in an appropriate fashion. The fact is, there were some, I would not necessarily call them flaws, but I'd say there were some areas of unclarity in the previous version that lent themselves to being misinterpreted, maybe inadvertently, maybe willfully. But this one has clarified. It's cleaned those things up. I mean, my stepson served in Iraq with the Army, and he and some of his colleagues came back with post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's not trivialize that and the suffering that's endured by people who've been through terrible stress, including our servicemen and women.
Sure, but it says other symptoms similar. So could a doctor say, tell me exactly what it says?
says, or other debilitating medical conditions, qualifying that they must be debilitating, of a similar kind or class as or comparable to those.
Of a similar, but couldn't that be interpreted very loosely?
The other thing on the language is that the physician must issue the physician certification, which is a document affirming the use of medical marijuana, following the letter of the amendment, following the rules and procedures set forth by the Department of Health, and with reasonable care, which is not a term we made up, it's a term with some legal.
Well, let me ask one more time. So could a doctor say, let's say somebody's having problems in school, let's say for whatever issue, let's say they were bullied in school, a high school student, could someone say, okay, they've suffered post-traumatic stress and they can be prescribed cannabis?
Okay, that's the second one, Mr. Abramson. I passed a bullying bill through the House last year and through the Senate, and it was signed by the governor. Bullying is real,
Okay,
and
so
the
somebody
stress that it imposes on people is real, and post-traumatic stress disorder is not limited to our veterans. It's real, and that's something that we need to trust our medical professionals, and that's the bottom line. Is there someone somewhere holding a medical license who's going to disobey and disavow their own oath? I'm sure there's somebody somewhere, but we need to trust our medical professionals. We're here in a school that's devoted to the study of medicine, and that's a decision that ought to be made between doctors and their patients. That's the whole point. I do trust our doctors to make that decision.
And let's hold the applause to a minimum. Afterwards, you can applaud everybody. Yes, please.
Yeah, let's talk about trust. Take a ride out to California right now. Just had a friend, fellow member, went out there for his daughter's wedding. All along the wharf now are head shops, and there's a sign that says the doctor's in. So whatever we'll come up with a reason, and you can start shopping. Does anybody remember the pill mill? We had states begging us to do something about it. Hey, my son's a physician. He's a psychiatrist. He's already got people calling him saying, is there some way you can prescribe this for me? This is the pressure that's going to be there on the medical profession. People come in and tell you what drugs they want. And they don't always make the best decisions. And I have never met any of these. I've been in 17 prisons this year. And I have never met anyone that hasn't started their journey with substance abuse smoking dope. That's just a fact.
15 seconds.
And so,
No, we're going to go back.
Just a moment. I just want to say,
10 seconds.
Senator, that, I'm sure that your son, the way he was raised in your household, is going to make the right decision with those people that are calling him up, but I have the same confidence in almost all of the medical professionals we have in this state. I think they're going to do the right thing, just like I know your son's going to do.
You want to respond to that?
I appreciate that, and you're right. He's going to say no to people that don't need things that think they need them. And he has to make that medical decision. But he's not the only doctor in town, and they'll shop till they find it. That's the nature of addictions.
All right, let's move on to the next question. And actually, you brought up the pill mill, and I'm glad you brought that up because it kind of leads right into this next question. Where here in Broward County, 200 people died from prescription opioid overdoses last year. New York Times reported in April that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, the annual rate of opioid overdose deaths decreased by 25% on average. So that means in Broward County, 50 less people would have died last year. They expect the number to double this year. So if medical marijuana was legal, it could save, let's say, 100 lives this year in Broward County alone. Isn't the likelihood of reducing deaths reason enough to legalize medical cannabis?
I think that's a very good question because Southeast Florida here has been an epicenter of opiate deaths, both from fentanyl and from other synthetic drugs that people are taking. But if you look at the facts, almost all of those people started with marijuana. Again, I'll go back to the Harvard study. 91%, let's say 100% of the people smoke pot. 91% of them aren't going to get addicted, but it's the 9%. We're spending billions of dollars because children are attacking their parents. We've got parents that aren't paying attention to their children. This is sending the wrong message. So yes, medical marijuana can save some people, and that's why the Florida legislature has passed 2 laws. You don't need this constitutional amendment. You already have
Actually,
it
wait,
in
the
statute.
states, the survey, that was the New York Times study, was about the actual THC marijuana. They're not counting the states that have the Charlotte's Web, that Florida.
Okay, but
currently-
we also have higher THC for those people that a doctor says that they're going to die within a year. We also have that available here in Florida. I would just tell you a couple of things. Number one, remember what I said at the beginning. There were 25 states that have passed this. Only 2 of them have put it in their constitution. You don't have to have it in the Constitution. They want it in the Constitution. And then
Okay, well,
it says...
we're talking about the prescription overdose deaths, so I'm going to get their
Okay.
rebuttal here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's one of the, for me, personally for me, it's the primary reason for passing this. I mean, I don't, thank God, come from a family that has a history of cancer and these other diseases, but I do come from a family that has seen, you know, its share of addiction, and we take too many pills as a society, and to the extent we can replace or supplement those pharmaceuticals with whether it be marijuana or anything else, that's a good thing for all of us. And I think this study that started off this question on has showed that. And I would also say to Representative Baxley, maybe your son, and this, I don't know, but maybe your son is getting these requests for marijuana because these people don't want to take pharmaceuticals. And that's a big thing for a lot of people. People don't like taking all these pills that we see 50 TV ads for every day. People don't like putting these poisons in their bodies, and people know that marijuana is relatively safe, and it's been around for thousands of years, and whatever its side effects are, which I'm not saying it's totally benign, they are almost certainly less than the average pharmaceutical that we're seeing in a 30-second TV ad.
Okay, we're going to move on to...
Let me just respond to that,
Quick
because
response.
I don't want to leave you with the impression that you should leave this room thinking that marijuana doesn't have any damages whatsoever. I mean, a lot of you are pharmacy students. So how many of you know how many double-blind studies there have been on 7-year-old kids that have epilepsy? Any hands? Anywhere? 0. Yes, sir. Exactly right. And see, well, that's a rule of the federal. Now, Smart Justice, we support changing that so that there can be research. But you don't put the cart before the horse. You don't essentially legalize marijuana so that you can experiment on kids. What you do is you allow research to be done. Now, Dr. Block
that was supposed to be a 10-second response. We're moving on to the next question.
Okay.
This is for the no side here. The first thing we see on your website when we log in right now is a dire warning that Amendment 2 doesn't have a local option to allow communities to decide where or how many pot shops they want. It places no restrictions on the location of seedy pot shops. But that's not how amendments in the state constitution work. Once it passes, it's up to the state legislature to set the guidelines. So aren't these misleading scare tactics?
What website are you talking about?
Your main website, though.
Not my main
First
web.
thing that comes up.
Not my main website. My main website, go to Florida Smart Justice Alliance.
Okay, well, you're
We
representing
don't
the
have
no
that.
side, so this
Well,
is the main
yeah, but that doesn't mean just like Joe and Ben may not agree on everything, because Ben didn't think much about PTSD for veterans. Joe thinks a lot about it.
Well,
There's
let me
people on our,
let me rephrase the
people on our, wait a second, people on our side have varying opinions as well. So look, the truth of the matter is that we don't know what the impact. Now, there's a study being done at the University of Miami. It's a level 3 study. I got a chance to meet Dr. Guy. Dr. Guy started GW Pharma in England. They are the manufacturer of Charlotte's Web. He is probably the foremost marijuana expert in the world. Probably the second best is Mahmoud El Suhouli, who is the director of the pot farm at Ole Miss. So you want to know why Ole Miss plays the way they are? They have official federal pot farm. But the point being is that there isn't a single double-blind study anywhere in the world. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, because we advocate for that. But I'm just telling you. Dr. Guy says he would never give
This has nothing to do with the question I asked.
Yes,
So
it does. With THC, let me finish. He would never give a THC product to a child under the age of 18. For adults, if you want to take it, hey, that's fine. But Think about the studies, because your pharmacy students, you got to go by the scientific, not what your gut feels.
Okay, let me ask the question again. So that has been a big argument on the no side, is that there's going to be a pot shop on every corner. Yet, once again, that's not how state amendments work. Once a constitutional amendment passes, it's up to the legislature to decide the guidelines. Individual communities can decide guidelines. So are these scare tactics going out from the no side?
No, I don't think they're scare tactics at all, but look at the constitutional amendment. How many of you have read the constitutional amendment? Go to the bottom section, check out the very last section. It says that if the Department of Health doesn't institute these guidelines within 6 months, and if within 9 months the cards aren't issued, then anybody in the state of Florida can sue the state of Florida. Now, John Morgan is a ubiquitous attorney. He's on every bus, he's on every bus stop, he's on the TV constantly. This is simply a creating a new field of marijuana pot law that's going to allow him to sue the state of Florida. Communities should be allowed to decide whether they want pot shops in their community or not. But trust me, there are going to be people that are going to sue this constitutional amendment. And the only reason why the laws haven't been more implemented is because there's been lawsuits. Not because the legislature didn't want to do it. The legislature told the Department of Health to do it, but there were lawsuits. There are going to be more lawsuits.
Can you guys respond to that, please?
I'd like to respond to the question you asked. And the question you asked is about how this amendment would be implemented. And the fact is that goes back to Senator Can I call you Senator?
Thank you.
Senator Baxley's point about the role of the legislature. Once it passes, the legislature has to come up with implementing legislation. And that is a proper role to look at those details. Those are tough to do by referendum. Although I'll say again, the only reason this has to be a constitutional amendment in the face of the failure of the legislature to adequately address it to serve the needs of the people is because we don't do what other states do. And by a majority vote, the people of this state should be able to adopt any law that they want to by a majority and not have to go into the Constitution, except that's our system. Now, that implementing legislation is going to respect the rights.
Yeah, someone's phone.
Okay.
Make sure
That
everyone's phone's
implementing legislation is going to respect the rights of communities, the same as every other law in this state, to have appropriate zoning. And those zoning regulations are actually being adopted now by local governments. So this doesn't mean you're going to have one on every corner. It's just not the case. It's just not what's going to happen. Local communities do have the police power to enact appropriate zoning legislation.
Okay.
And I'm confident that we will come out with good, fair, implementing legislation. But this local opt-out is a ridiculous scare tactic. And final point that Ben wants to
Okay,
address is
wrap it up.
what was raised by Mr. Bishop about the lawsuits.
I don't think what was raised by Barney is worth addressing.
I would like to address
Most things.
Quick, 10 seconds.
Yeah, I would simply say that it is not a scare tactic to make people aware of genuine risk, and particularly when that is the evidence in states where they've moved forward on this.
Okay. Next question is for the yes side. While cannabis itself has never killed anybody, there's the potential for stone drivers to cause accidents. We've seen an increase in fatal crashes involving cannabis across the nation. It's one of the reasons the Florida Police Chief Association came out against this amendment. Why legalize something that has led to an increase in fatal car accidents?
Why has it led to an increase?
Yeah, why would you? I mean, is that
I don't know that that's entirely accurate. I know that we've been tracking marijuana in car accidents, in traffic accidents, to a much greater degree than because of medical marijuana laws being passed in 25 states, because of marijuana legalization in a handful of states. And the other thing is, you don't know when listen, we are lucky that alcohol, which is the single biggest intoxicant out there, and the thing that if you're consuming, you should absolutely not be behind the wheel. We are lucky that it is also the easiest to test for, right? Literally no other substance can you do a breathalyzer. So with marijuana, and marijuana in the way that it is absorbed by your body and stays in your body, it's tough to tell when that person consumed marijuana. So just because a car accident happened and marijuana was found in their system does not mean that one had anything to do with the other, versus alcohol, that was happening. And so, listen, the experience of the country and the states that have legalized medical marijuana have been, the sky has not fallen. People have gotten relief.
Okay, no, we're going to stick to the car. Wait, we're going to stick to the car question. Can I get your rebuttal?
Well, I'm just so glad that Ben has decided that there's new law in the state of Florida that just because there's marijuana found in the car or in your system, maybe that didn't have any impact on the accident. So I guess that applies to alcohol too, huh, Ben? No, don't interrupt me, sir. You've already said it was what you said, but don't interrupt me,
Here, let's
please.
let's let Ben explain.
No, wait a second. Let me finish. Gosh.
I want him to explain what he said and then go
Well,
back to
I know what he said. It's on tape. And what he said is that just because you find marijuana in a car or in the person, that doesn't mean that was the cause of the accident. Well, you're making new law, Ben, and you're not a lawyer, neither am I. And the problem is that we do have evidence of alcohol in a car is enough to arrest you if you blow and if you refuse to blow. And we can do those tests on marijuana. But look, there's kids that are jumping off of balconies. There are people with edibles in Colorado that have jumped off of balconies after eating medical marijuana edibles. Yes. There have been deaths.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. This is to the no side. The Florida and National Epilepsy Foundation supports Amendment 2, saying Florida residents living with epilepsy and uncontrolled seizures can gain safe, legal access to medical marijuana as a treatment option. There are Florida mothers who are traveling to California to obtain cannabis for their children. The low-grade THC products do not work for them. What's your message to that mother? Would you encourage her to move to a state that has legal cannabis?
Well, I can tell you, as a father of 5 and with 8 grandchildren, I take that parental responsibility as primary. And I'll go anywhere I have to go in the world, whether it's legal or not, if it'll help my child survive. And so I certainly affirm those parents doing whatever they need to do. But I think it's also a testament that these things are available. I mean, I may load up and go to MD Abramson in Texas because of their ability with cancer. That's a parental choice to go for those things that you think are the best option for you to try. It doesn't mean that the state needs to turn its whole policy upside down on the use of marijuana. I also have a son that's a deputy sheriff, and I can tell you this will turn enforcement upside down on its head. Right now, all they have to do is demonstrate possession, and they can get this person off the road. But we don't know. This is the problem with opening this big Pandora's box through a constitutional amendment, is you can't wade into these layers of policy a piece at a time. You're going to open the door first and then see what happens, and then we'll go along and try to fix things. Well, in the meanwhile, a lot of people are damaged. This is the biggest hazard in legislation, is unintended consequences.
What's your response to the Epilepsy Foundation specifically, who are supporting this?
I think it's wonderful to advocate care for their patients who think that will be in their interest. This is what special interests are, by the way. They have a special interest in this, and so they're taking a position. But we have to look at the whole picture. You can't decide public policy on one person's case study.
Okay, can I get the rebuttal?
Absolutely. This is the most important thing we've talked about. This is why this is needed. This is why we have to have this. Because, you know, as much as I respect the sincerity of my friend Senator Baxley, the reality is that if you've got a child with epilepsy and you're working in this state at the miserable excuse for a minimum wage that we have here, you don't have the option of going to California or MD Anderson or anything else. You need to be able to get help for your child and get it right here. And that's why this is important, is not just for the children suffering from epilepsy, the people suffering from cancer, all of the people who are suffering and need this now. They need it now. Those kids need to live. They need to be able to make it in this world and to survive without waiting for more decades of study. I'm all for the medical research, but we need this. The suffering people in this state not all of whom can afford to pick up and run off someplace to take care of their children. They need this tomorrow. That's why there's a time limit in it, because
Okay.
people are suffering. We have to have this.
All right, next question here. This is for the yes side. A lot of people think this is just a foot in the door for recreational cannabis. Is this just a guise to get Floridians used to a legal form of marijuana before recreational marijuana is introduced? And do you believe marijuana should be legal for everyone in Florida regardless of medical need?
I mean, I think it's a ridiculous argument. I can speak for myself personally, and I can speak for this organization that I run, United for Care. For myself personally, yeah, sure, I believe marijuana should be legal, but that's not my fight. It is not the fight of this organization. It is not what I have spent the last 4 years of my life doing. I'm done with marijuana after this thing is over, and I know John Morgan is too. We did an editorial board meeting a few months ago where he was asked the same question, and he said, "You will not see me pushing for the legalization of marijuana ever. I will vote for it, but if you see me pushing another constitutional amendment, it will be to raise the minimum wage to $15. And I'm with Morgan. Wherever he's going, I'm going. So you will not see this organization pushing for the legalization of marijuana. This is about the 500,000 plus sick and suffering Floridians in our state who could benefit from medical marijuana now, who need it now, and it's not about legalization.
Well, you just heard what actually motivates it. He's going to make all of his ethical decisions based on where Morgan & Morgan is. It's about the money, people. What do you think this thing's all tied up in court for? I hear all this passion about the people need it, and, you know, it's for the children. No, it isn't. It's for the money. They want to make that money, both in litigation and in selling pot. And they do want it to go as far and wide as it will do to build that dollar. And you can deal with the consequences. They don't care. You can make some other rules. They want the money. And if you can't see that, you're not looking under the rug. It's real.
Yes, at the end when this wraps up. Do you, I mean, one thing the yes side keeps saying to the no side is you're opposed to any reform of marijuana laws. Is this true? I mean, is there any law that you could support involving the high-grade THC?
No, we already have high-grade THC available.
For the people who are end of life. I'm saying
Yes.
for more expanded. Is there
Well,
any
I
law
mean-
you could support?
Sure, I mean, that's up to the legislature, the people that you elect to send up to Tallahassee to make those decisions for you. I would just tell you that I'm not sure that I would hold John Morgan up to be somebody that's really doing this for the right reasons. I mean, he tells us that he does it for the right reasons, but you have to look at his actions, not what he says. So what did he do 2 years ago when we had the constitutional amendment? He had a pot bus tour. I wish I'd been invited. But the problem is that if you're seeking compassion, if you're seeking help for compassionate people at the end of life, don't you think that you would go to nursing homes, assisted living facilities, maybe a couple of hospice around the way? You know where John Morgan went? He went to college campuses just like this. You know why? Because you guys are dying every single day of debilitating illnesses. What a shame.
This has turned into a John
Watch
Morgan
what they
debate.
do, not what they say.
I would like to ask, all right,
I've
he's
gotta-
thrown out a lot
I've
about
gotta
John
let
Morgan
me-
there.
You gotta let me defend John here.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Yeah, I will. I know John Morgan.
He's the one that picked this argument. We didn't pick it.
John Morgan has a soul, which is more than I can say for Barney. And let me tell you about John Morgan.
Barney's got a lot of soul. I gotta say that. Barney's got a lot.
Let's not get personal, Ben. You always like to do that, but let's keep it on the up and up, huh?
Yeah, let's keep it on the up and up, Lorne.
All right.
Listen, let me tell you about John Morgan. John Morgan has put $8 million of his money into this because
Money.
he believes it is the right thing to do, because his brother Tim has been in a wheelchair since he was 18 years old, and marijuana is what gets him through the day, because his father Ramon died of lung cancer in the early 90s, and marijuana bought him another year or 2 of life because he was able to actually eat a meal instead of wasting away in his bed. John Morgan and his wife Ultima put $2 million into the Orlando Food Bank. They're building a women's shelter in Orlando. these are good, charitable people. These are people with a soul. So do not question why he is doing this. Do not say it is for the money. It is for the right reasons. It is for compassion, and that is less than I can say about you, Mr. Bishop.
All right, quick response to that one.
You know, I'm not going to stoop to Ben's level. This is the third time I've debated him. He does this all the time. You know, this is what happens when you're immature, but you're passionate. So let's talk about John Morgan.
Okay, no, I think, no. Actually, we're not going to talk about it. We talked enough about John Morgan. Let me ask you the next question. One more question here. The potency has been brought up on this side that it's 20 times more potent. Is there going to be any regulation? Is there going to be any regulation by the state in terms of the potency of the marijuana?
Yes. Of course, it's in the amendment. It's the state, the Department of Health has to set testing, labeling, packaging, safety regulations, which that would certainly fall under. And I actually I appreciate this question because I actually wrote an op-ed piece in the Sentinel on this very issue. This whole notion that one of the reasons you should be against medical marijuana is because this is not your daddy's pot, is the line, is rooted in reality, but also somewhat ridiculous. Yes, I will agree with Barney on this one. Marijuana today is stronger than it was a decade ago, or 2 decades ago, or 3 decades ago. But you know what? Whiskey is stronger than beer. You don't drink the same amount of whiskey as you do beer. If the marijuana is 20 times stronger today, that means you consume 1/20th of it. And so it's an absolutely ridiculous argument. But it is certainly something that could be well regulated and is required to be regulated by the state of Florida under the amendment.
Okay, rebuttal, please.
Well, again, we're doing this thing all backwards. Nobody knows what's an appropriate dosage or what anybody should be taking, and yet we're going to wide open the doors. And it definitely is a continuum of opinions about what's appropriate, and it needs to be a continuum of decisions that we make and how to relate and how do we change our policies. So to say that it's okay, just throw it out there, and they can make up the rules later, that's how we get in big trouble in the legislature, opening big canisters and saying, oh, we'll work it out later. And then meanwhile, you turn law enforcement upside down, you turn health upside down, and everybody's sitting in litigation trying to sort it out because you haven't gotten things in order before you legalized it. We're doing it backwards.
Okay. Now we're going to go to Scott, who has some questions, I believe, from Twitter. Always good questions from Twitter.
So from Veronica, how can the yes stance be behind medical marijuana without the scientific evidence that backs its medical use?
There is voluminous scientific evidence as well as the evidence of the entirety of human civilization that marijuana is medicine and it is a relatively safe and effective one.
Actually, let me respond to that, because just because you found marijuana in somebody's grave doesn't mean that they were using it to save themselves. They might have died from it. I mean, let's consider both options, okay? I don't know how you talked to somebody 3,000 years old and made that decision, Ben, but I'll tell you what, I'm impressed. Archaeologists aren't medical people. The truth of the matter is that this constitutional amendment isn't going to get you pot any quicker than the statutes already get it. The statutes are 2 years ahead of this constitutional amendment. I understand what Joe says.
That's way off topic. Let's just stick to the questions and topics. Go ahead, Scott.
Next question from Kathleen Baldwin. What is the cost to treat in cancer pain? The problem here is that most people, especially the indigent area, cannot afford this treatment. What is going to be done in the sense of cost?
I don't know what marijuana would cost under this amendment. I can tell you it's going to cost a lot under the current law because the state has given basically an oligopoly to only 6 companies. So they can dictate whatever the pricing is going to be, and there's not going to be any sort of healthy free market competition.
I just got to add a word. Keep in mind, one of the benefits of this is that if you're eligible and qualified and your doctor has recommended this, you're not going to have to interact with street criminals to get the medicine that you need. It's going to be regulated by the state. They're not going to be able to scalp people for it. It's going to be controlled, and people who need this and whose doctors think they need it are not going to be forced into supporting some criminal enterprise to get the medicine they need. That's one of the huge benefits to people who need this drug, that they'll be able to get it legally.
Actually, I do have a.
And I'd like to agree with Joe. Unfortunately, out of 20,000 doctors, 60 doctors have taken the exam, and you have to have a 3-month relationship. So it's that's less than 1 per county in Florida. So hopefully more doctors will sign up, but so far the medical establishment hasn't exactly embraced this. So it's going to still be difficult, but it's easier to get under the statute because it's 2 years ahead of whatever constitutional amendment that's going to pass. So you do have it now.
I do have one question. Scott has one more question, but I just want to ask a quick question to the yes side. That, you know, last time this got 58%. If this doesn't hit the 60% mark, what happens next? I mean, you can't keep coming back to the voters.
I change my name and move into another state and sell pharmaceuticals door by door. I don't know.
Oh, really? What would happen?
No, what would happen, I think for me, I can't speak for John, but I've had conversations with him about it. I think that this is it. I mean, he spent $8 million. We've done this twice. If the people of Florida don't want this in this election, then it's certainly not going to be me and John Morgan. But I think that's neither here nor there, because we're going to win this on November 8th, and we're going to win it by a gigantic margin, assuming people in Broward can vote. But I don't think your question will come to fruition.
But let me add, as somebody who's not part of that group, who's a supporter of this, I'm going to continue, whether it's implementing legislation or if this thing didn't pass, working with my friend Senator Baxley to find something that can pass the legislature that won't only help people at the end of life, that'll address the problems of these children. I hope we pass it and cross this bridge with implementing legislation, but I'm not going to give up this fight either way. We're going to keep fighting to get people the help they need, and if that means there has to be only a legislative solution, I'm going to continue to be there working on that.
Scott, you had another Twitter question? One more?
So we know under federal law that this is obviously a restriction when it comes to medical providers. And we know that in Florida, under the amendment, that physicians are going to be writing recommendations rather than prescriptions. In terms of pharmacists being involved, what would you say on the yes side to implement something that we can ensure that patients are being able to explain their interactions with their medications and their medical providers?
Well, you know, there's obviously, there has to be a relationship with the physician, and that's the primary medical relationship that's going to happen in this transaction. Pharmacists are not going to be, at least formally, a part of the medical marijuana system in Florida, just like they're not anywhere in the country, because to be a pharmacist you have to be regulated by the DEA every day with the supplies that you're keeping, and marijuana remains a Schedule I substance, so it would put the rest of the drugs that you've got in the supply closet at potential risk with your DEA licensure if you're going to get involved in the marijuana industry. So that's, listen, one of the biggest public policy issues, forget about the scare tactics and this and that, the biggest public policy issues around medical marijuana concern the state-federal conflict. It's something that we were kind of hoping would be resolved over the summer when the DEA looked at rescheduling marijuana and decided not to, but did open up research. It's something that people in the marijuana industry have to deal with on a daily basis, paying essentially 100% effective tax rate because they can't take deductions because of an IRS provision called 280E. People who are in this business leave their house not knowing if they're going to return at night because it's an all-cash business and they got a big target on their back. And the Justice Department has said to states, we won't interfere with legal marijuana laws that states have passed and regulated. You have to hit certain parameters, and one of them is no armed guards. So you've got people in the marijuana business carrying huge amounts of cash, and they're not allowed to be armed. So those are a lot of the big public policy issues with medical marijuana concern this state-federal divide.
Okay, we're gonna have
luckily,
to.
we've got two candidates for president who both support medical marijuana, and a United States Senate that is moving closer to fixing some of this stuff, where the House has already been. But yeah, it's an issue.
You want a quick closing statement,
respond
60
to that,
seconds.
please?
We're now going to do closing statements now.
I was just going to respond to that.
Well, you want to mention
Let
it?
him respond.
Okay, quick.
Yeah, I think all that he's saying is illustrating that we've got it backwards. We need to start at that end, because we want to do more research. We tried to fund research with our universities out of this legislation. They can't take the money because it's violating a federal law, and we're doing it backwards, and we're wondering why it doesn't work. This does need to be weighed into incrementally over time. And the other thing is, you can't have a highly regulated process that works and then and think that it's not going to affect everything else. In Colorado right now, you think buying it legal and getting it organized and doing it the right way has solved the black market issue? No, the black market has expanded because you've told everybody it's great, use it.
Okay, we're new closing statements, and since the yes side had the first word, we're going to give the no side the last word. So let's start with yes. 60 seconds, closing statement.
This is something that's needed by the people in this state. It's just that simple. We're here at a school that's dedicated to the healing arts, and this is something that can help people heal. Whether it should not be limited to the low THC that passed the legislature, and the notion that only people in their last year of life can benefit from it is just not correct. I wish that there was an alternative to putting it in the Constitution. As I said, we ought to be able to adopt a law by referendum, but until that happens, this is the only way we can make it happen now, and it's needed now. If it was your child suffering from epilepsy and their life was on the line, you don't want to sit there and wait while this is debated endlessly in the halls of the legislature. Some of these particular problems we've talked about will all be addressed. There has to be implementing legislation. There are going to be zoning laws in local communities. Some of this parade of horribles that's been put up are really just as our moderator called them. They're scare tactics. People who are suffering from cancer and have no appetite. People who have their children suffering with epilepsy. And this list of debilitating diseases. We need this. The people want it. The people want it now, and they can't all afford to go traveling across the country. We need to do this for our own citizens. We need to do it the right way. This is the better solution than people going out on street corners having to deal with criminals. This is going to be regulated by the medical profession, by the state of Florida, and it's going to be done in the right, safe, appropriate way to get people the help they need. Please support this.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I think it's wonderful that we've been here today. I want to thank again those who've invited us and arranged. I want to thank all of you who worked to arrange this. And as you can see, Representative Geller is a wonderful colleague that we get to truly debate ideas. And I think there's been tremendous progress made by this movement to realize we're going to have to look at marijuana differently. We're going to have to handle it differently. Where I differ and oppose this amendment is that it doesn't belong in the Constitution. It's going to be more difficult to selectively build the right policy for each of these different windows that you're going to discover. And please don't just open up a Pandora's box of problems. It's great that we've had the discussion, and it has brought forth a reality that there is some medical efficacy here that we need to look at. But there are also a lot of unintended consequences, and there's great limitation on the legislature. I hear a lot of confidence that we're going to work it all out with the regulators, but we don't trust the regulators, so we're in rebellion and we're going to put it in the Constitution. Well, you got to find that middle place. Folks, the middle place is to say, look, we've made a statement. We want policy changed in this area, and we realize that we want it done carefully and correctly so that we don't create unintended consequences. We understand the objective, but let me tell you, there are many other people that want one thing. They want the money this will generate, and that's what they're after, and I'm all for people making money. It's a good thing, but not at the expense of everybody's health. I too am concerned about their health. And that's why I don't want this done in a careless, reckless manner that is in clear violation of the federal law, and we're stuffing it in the Constitution. where it doesn't belong. There is a process of representative government, and there is a process of change in how we look at and regulate marijuana in our society. And I would appreciate you being very considerate about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, we're going to have a panel, but first, we're going to have a medical panel speak. But first, I want to thank everyone who participated today. I wish John Morgan had been here to answer some of these questions for you guys.
That would have been lively.
But I know. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Please stay with us. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to go right into our medical panel. If our members could come right up. Yes, please.
Medical water.
You want to bring your cards with you?
Bishop, always a pleasure.
Yeah, feel free to stay.
What do you want to speak?
We're going to go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 right here.
Where would you like me, Scott? It's up to you. If you'd like, sure. So I'll get between the pharmacists.
Right now, no, but at the end, yes.
I didn't
We gotta go. Sorry, we gotta go. We have to start this up. Please, thank you. Please stay with us. We're about to introduce our medical panel.
Okay. It's nice to see you. Is your husband? Is your husband here?
I'm sorry. I gotta start.
So I'm going here now?
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm still here, right? Okay.
What's that?
Okay. What'd you think? You liked it so far? It was my Wi-Fi.
Okay, we'll begin. Can I get it quiet in here, please?
Now you get to hear from the medical experts.
First, I would like to reintroduce Dr. Robert Speth, Ph.D. professor at NSU College of Pharmacy, research affiliate of the Institution for Ethnomedicine, and the Provost Research and Scholarship Award recipient. Thank you, Dr. Speth.
Thank you.
Dr. Jose Valdez, Pharm.D., assistant professor at the NSU College of Pharmacy. Thank you, Dr. Valdez. And Dr. Jeffrey Block, and I do apologize, I did a bad job of introducing him in the beginning. He's a nationally respected authority in both the healthcare and natural earth sciences concerning botanical medicine, education, and research. He's an American board certified anesthesiologist who is additionally fellowship trained in pain management and addiction medicine. Dr. Block was chosen as the Florida Medical Association designated expert on botanical medicines and was appointed to structure the framework and author the introductory chapter for physicians' education as mandated by the Florida's Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act of 2014. Thank you, Dr. Block.
Now, I think what we were kind of envisioning here was just going to each of our medical experts, kind of just getting a feel for what they thought of this debate, some of the issues raised. And we'll start with Dr. Speth. Just tell us, first of all, from the medical side, the arguments you heard today, how you felt they did, and what you think of this amendment overall.
Okay. I don't think this mic is on.
Half an hour.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, yeah, a couple of issues here. One with regard to research. The suggestion was made that the research is not there. I would disagree very strongly with that. The research that has been done over in Europe and over in Israel is extremely compelling, showing that there are valid medical benefits to medical marijuana. The other issue, which I found very disturbing, was Representative Bishop's statement that there is no double-blind, placebo-controlled studies in 7-year-olds showing the efficacy of medical marijuana. I think it's extremely unfortunate, as someone who teaches research ethics in the College of Pharmacy, that this individual would be wanting to hold hostage 7-year-old children who are suffering from potentially fatal epilepsy and requiring them to be subject to double-blind studies. This would be equivalent to taking a group of cancer patients and telling them, okay, half of you are going to get this drug that we think will cure your cancer, and the other half of you are going to get a sugar pill. So I found that extremely disturbing. And one last issue I want to raise is that indeed for 5,000 years, marijuana has been shown to be medically efficacious. And indeed, in the 29-year-old 2900 BC tomb in which the marijuana was found, there was documentation suggesting that it was being used for medicinal purposes. And it wasn't until 1970 that marijuana became Schedule I, thereby was stripped of its ability to have medicinal value. And this was done according to an article in Harper's Magazine in April 2016, whereby the Dan Baum, the editor or the writer, interviewed John Ehrlichman, who was the chief of staff of the legal counsel for President Nixon, who said, the reason we're doing this is we want to make the anti-Vietnam War protesters criminals. So let's criminalize marijuana so these people can now become criminals, and we're really not fighting the anti-Vietnam War protesters, but we're fighting drug abusers.
Dr. Valdez, can we get your reaction to what you heard and the arguments that were made from the medical side of the debate?
Sure. So I think this was a pretty good debate. I think we heard a lot of really relevant issues on both sides. But I think I came out of this debate actually with more questions than I had anticipated. So being here at the College of Pharmacy, I have a strong bias because I am a pharmacist. When one of the people up here commented saying that pharmacists are not currently allowed, or they're not currently in legislation to be able to help manage some of these patients, I'm strongly against that, because I really do feel that as pharmacists, we are the drug experts. We should be intimately involved with these patients, reviewing medication profiles. We should be looking towards all these patients and their different drug interactions that could potentially happen with all these different medications that they might be taking. We look at a patient with epilepsy. They might be on 2, maybe be on 3, maybe on 4 medications. If we add in a cannabis or a cannabidiol type medication, there could be some potential interactions. What about someone who's terminally ill? They have a stroke. They're on some medication like Plavix, and now they're taking cannabis because they're terminally ill. There could potentially be an interaction with that, and they could have another stroke. So to say that pharmacists don't have a place in it yet, or maybe they should, maybe they don't have one, I strongly feel that they should. Just like in the state of Connecticut, where pharmacists are required to be involved in the dispensing process.
So does that make you less likely to support this because of the fact that pharmacists can't be involved as it's written?
That is neither here nor there, because I support patients trying to get what they need in order to treat their illnesses. But I want them to do it in the safest way possible. And if they come to me at my clinic and they want to talk to me about their medications, and they also tell me that they're on cannabis, or that they're taking some cannabis extract, I'm going to be very happy to talk to that person and counsel them about potential drug interactions and look to see and make sure that everything is going to be safe. But I'm not accessible to everybody. Another thing, so someone also mentioned the cost issue. So as it stands, there's no health insurance that's going to be covering medical marijuana. And medical marijuana could potentially be very expensive. If someone opts to try and treat their cancer or their certain illness or epilepsy or something with just cannabis, and they stop taking their other medications because they can't afford it or because of any other reason, we know that the other medications are safe and efficacious. we know marijuana is mostly safe and efficacious for certain specific indications. It is not a panacea. It is not a treat-all. It is not a cure-all. Marijuana does not cure. So I would have a personal issue if people try and use medical marijuana or cannabis without using any of their other medications because of a cost issue.
Dr. Block,
Well, good afternoon.
make sure you speak.
I thank you. I realize you're wanting to hear comments about what I think about the debate and the law, and I don't want to disappoint you.
Then don't.
But I want to be able to share with you really what the science should be, which is scrupulously neutral. So how can I comment for or against something without just bringing the medicine itself to light? And to begin with, then I really want to thank Nova Southeastern University, because this is exactly why institutions like this exist, academic institutions. It's supposed to bring people from the community, researchers from far and wide together to discuss the science, promote further thought, force further thought, all in the name of promoting better health care. And these are health care measures. The debate itself was involving health care. I sat in on the same debates 2 years ago, and many of the respondents to questions from talented moderators respond, well, you know, that's a medical question, and I'm not a doctor, but, and then they go on to give their opinion. Well, I'd like to share with you some opinions on this, because I do have them. And ultimately, this results because at this moment, it's under prohibition. Cannabis, a medicine. Federally, it's illegal. So what that does is it puts all of the responsibility that both sides of the debate are not necessarily thrusting, but entrusting on physicians in having real bona fide relationships with patients in order to have to answer the basic question of how should a physician respond to a patient seeking compassionate care while under federal prohibition? And so it really does reduce then to an ethical consideration. The problem is the way this process has evolved, not only here in Florida, but across the country over the last 20 years, it's done through a very effective politically and legislative mantra of compassion. And physicians are compassionate. We're all compassionate. But when we're thrust into a situation where we're being asked to be compassionate and at the same time have to be law-abiding citizens, which we are as physicians, we're stuck in the middle, because physicians have two licenses. It's not just the state license that allows us to authorize, technically it can't be prescribed. The Schedule I federal drug or substance can't be legally prescribed, but to authorize, recommend, even order is possible. So the reason you don't see mainstream physicians in this arena, 60 out of 20,000 you brought up before, are for two reasons. The first is that DEA license that I have, and most physicians have, our ability to prescribe medicines, controlled substance and otherwise, that's our tool bag. And there are precedent to where a physician who ventures into this arena in states even where it's legal have jeopardized the federal government taking away that tool bag. And so most physicians will not venture into there to see a patient who wants medical marijuana at this stage. Why? It's a science in its infancy. We don't know very much.
Can I ask a question then about this?
Sure.
So then who do you see, what doctors are going to be recommending cannabis if this passes? What type of doctors do you see actually making the...
Well, if you can tell, I'm not a hippy-dippy doc. Okay? And nor do I want to be, because that's the Santa Monica image that is so feared here, because yes, you can go to places there where you'll see $50 sign, for your medical card, and then you go down the street and it's $40, a little further down $30. It makes you wonder where it's going to stop. But that's part of the business end of this. That's part of the industry. And whoever in the debate gave the analogy of the cart getting ahead of the horse, the cart is really the stakeholder influences and anecdotal information. You could say evidence, but it's not real data. I've heard people say that the plural of anecdotes is not data, and it isn't. But this is in essence then something that needs to be led through the science and through the ethics. And the ethics are not traditional medical legal ethics, because that's what's been tried to be worked through in the last 20 years. And the reason it's failed, and I'll tell you that Article 3 in the American Medical Association's ethics states that simply a physician shall respect the law and also recognize a responsibility to seek changes in those requirements which are contrary to the best interests of the patient. Makes sense, and in a lot of issues it is important. The reason that that approach has failed is because mainstream docs are not likely to want to threaten that license that holds their tool bag, and also for another reason. The way most of the states in the last 20 years, 25 to count today, that have medical bills, it's progressing with actually saying which chemicals in the cannabis plant can be used, and actually for which specific diseases, which is really what the focus of this amendment, as well as the other laws we currently have in Florida, are focused. That means what formulary can you use and for what diseases? The last time I looked, that was called the practice of medicine, and physicians understandably hate to be dictated and legislated the practice of why we're licensed and trained. So part of the process of medical legal approaches to this has failed. Really what you're here today and we're experiencing is different. It's a bioethical approach. Bioethics, for those of you that may not be familiar with that term, is something that largely resulted after World War II. Science revealed certain things that we didn't know how to deal with before. And if you want a good example of how well bioethics can progress a subject, go back 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when stem cells had limited lines of research because of previous constraints, it took a bioethical process just like we're doing here to work through it. And today, 10 years later, there are many people alive because of the good quality research for things that could not have been possible 10 years ago under those constraints. That's the process. Cannabis is going through a similar process right now as it works its way across the country. That's good. It is a process. I understand perfectly why the Florida citizens are looking at an alternative, though, after 2, 3, or more years of trying to get this enacted in Florida by going the constitutional route, because it has taken a lot of time for a legislative process to actually get these medicines available for patient use. Same thing, though, has happened before, and it wasn't only then, it was, as you brought up before, the OxyContin pill mills, and I hate to say there's infamy here in Broward County, but there is. 10 years ago, 2006, 5, even into 2007, we were actually the laughing stock of the country for how easily those OxyContin pill mills were doling out medicines. Okay. And that stopped the system. That basically caused the patient registry, which now transferred over to cannabis. That's good, but the years that it took some of the confidence in the legislative process and gave us really great intolerance to it, and that's why this amendment is in the form of a constitutional amendment now.
Okay, and we'll come back, we'll go over, we got a question we're going to ask all the panelists. We'll start with Dr. Spetha. What's wrong with Marinol, the oils that are in Charlotte's Web? I mean, why aren't these good enough from a medical standpoint to treat patients?
Okay, that's a very good question. Marinol has been available since approximately 1980. Initially, when it was marketed, it was Schedule II. Schedule II meaning it had medical value, but it had a great potential for abuse. Very interestingly, you would have expected that there would be a lot of street value for Marinol or Dronabinol, which is the actual generic name for it. And there wasn't. And it caught everybody by surprise. You know, this is the identical substance to THC. That's the putative active ingredient in marijuana. And yet, it didn't have a street value. Subsequently, I think it was about 1989, they switched it to Schedule III, which meant that there wasn't nearly the great amount of abuse potential. Now, Marinol has been used and prescribed, and it does not have as good efficacy as the entire plant constituency of marijuana, which would suggest that there is some type of additive or synergistic effects of the other ingredients, either the other cannabinoids or the terpenes. There's approximately 500 different substances in marijuana. So this is strongly implying that you need a combination of the substances in marijuana, and it's not just THC acting on its own.
Okay. Same question, Dr. Valdez?
All right. So with dronabinol, we know that dronabinol is effective in patients that have AIDS wasting and chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting. We have clinical trials to support the use of this in these indications. To turn around and say this dronabinol is going to be helpful in other syndromes that we're trying to look for, such as epilepsy, that's not the case because they're different compounds. With epilepsy, we're looking at the CBD component. Dronabinol does not have a CBD component, so it's an unfair comparison. There are clinical trials right now with the medication Epidiolex and another one, nabiximols. So these medications that are actually undergoing phase 3 clinical trials are showing benefit in children with Lennox-Gastaut or other Dravet syndrome seizure epilepsy disorders or syndromes. It's also showing efficacy in patients that have MS spasticity and even neuropathic pain as a result of their MS spasticity. With multiple sclerosis, MS, yes. So we do see benefits with some of the available medications that we're currently studying. However, with the current medications that we have available, such as dronabinol, we can't make that comparison just yet. Dr. Block.
Yeah, thank you. Now, actually, I get to put on my plantsman hat. I know something about plants. Botanical medicines, of course, is really what we're talking about. The issue of marinol is it's one chemical. And the plant didn't evolve to represent its true formulary for how it provides its defenses against nature with one chemical. It's combinations of things. The error in thought and the reason why cannabis is best known to work within multiple cannabinoids. Cannabinoids is the word for the chemicals that basically are working within our own body's receptor system is because one tends to offset the side effects of the other. So in fact, THC by itself, which even though it's the only psychoactive compound, has many of its effects and side effects balanced by other chemicals, particularly cannabidiol, said CBD. It's the cannabidiol part that helps little kids with seizures. But in terms of nausea and vomiting, going back to the thrust of marinol, why it's listed the way it is and why it in of itself is not effectual is because it's only one compound of many. And that fact is part of the way that plants have evolved. So when you're looking then at plants in general, it's very important to understand that they've evolved with a balance of chemicals, not simply the cannabinoids, but terpenes. These are other chemicals that give plants their fragrances, the odors. They work too in defensive ways so that a user, when they're using cannabis, even of the same amount of THC, might realize very different effects from one varietal or the other, despite having the same amount. Most studies for pain medicine use for plant chemicals derived from cannabis show that combinations of chemicals seem to work better. And it's because of that synergy. I could go on further, but the delivery system is the next thing I'll comment with dronabinol, with marinol. When someone uses it for nausea, and they take a pill that's onset maybe 20, 30 minutes at a minimum later, compared to the old-fashioned way of inhaling, whether through vapor or combustion of the whole plant's chemicals, the speed of onset when you're nauseated is a big difference. So the users who compare it to what they may have achieved with trying cannabis in terms of smoking or vaporizing is noticeably different, and that's sort of the reason it really hasn't gathered much popular use compared to the plant's natural balance and the way it's delivered.
Okay, so next question, we'll start with Dr. Valdez this time. Have all the debilitating diseases that are in this amendment, like PTSD, have they all been studied specifically how they relate with marijuana?
So I'll say that the indications that this amendment is trying to pass have been studied. However, a lot of the indications don't have as rigorous as data as I would prefer there to be before I start recommending it to people. We see patients that with the, for example, there's a review that the American Academy of Neurology went ahead and published in 2015 that reviewed the use of oral cannabinoid extracts in patients with Huntington's disease, in patients with Parkinson's disease, in patients with various other illnesses that pertain to neurology. They found that in their review, a lot of the different indications, for example, with Huntington's disease, these oral cannabinoid extracts didn't have much efficacy. In patients that have had certain epilepsies, we have seen a slew of anecdotal data that says that it's very helpful in patients with epilepsy, especially Dravet syndrome. We all know the Charlotte's Web story, and we all know that the Sanjay Gupta CNN documentary that shows it's very helpful. However, there's not a lot of clinical trials to support the use in many other epilepsy syndromes. Again, it's not a panacea. It's not a cure-all. It's not something that we want to be using for every single indication. Could it be helpful for PTSD? Clinical trials do show that it can be helpful. Is it helpful for patients with chemo-induced nausea, vomiting, or chemotherapies, or cancer pain? It could be helpful.
Dr. Block, same question. Do you feel like that all the debilitating diseases in this amendment, that marijuana has accurately been studied and how it reacts?
No. Okay.
That's it?
I get to expand upon that.
That was a short one for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, you started with PTSD, so let's go ahead and talk about that, because that was the next in the sequencing of CNN's things where they brought PTSD in veterans to light with stress disorders and associated with different use and abuse of narcotics as well as other antipsychotics with a high suicide rate. That was the gist of why another compassionate care mantra that's been very effective was brought to light. The fact is that PTSD was added to this amendment compared to 2 years ago because it's trending, it's popular, and it's a concern, and it's certainly a compassionate concern. What we were just bringing up a moment ago, Dr. Valdez brought up evidence-based data versus anecdotal. Anecdotal are those things culturally or that you have suspicions with, but the data is something that happens. It's a process. And the fact is that right now, medicines for PTSD are being looked at in a way through studies that you may have also seen in one of the issues with CNN, Sue Sisley, who's a medical colleague who got funding taken away from one academic institution and reinstated another to study veterans for PTSD, where different formularies of chemicals would be looked at. The bottom line answer to your question is the jury's still out. This is a process. When I look at all the 10 specific diagnoses that are put into the amendment, and that's not including the statement of other debilitating medical conditions and so on, that's where the exploitation may happen. There are only a handful of those 10 which right now, in my opinion, have the benefit of evidence-based data to support their use at the end of 2016. This is the reality of it. Multiple sclerosis patients who have intractable muscle spasms as a source of pain and disability, yeah, I'm impressed with that. Neuropathic pain, that's not all pain. Neuropathic pain is nerve-mediated pain. Diabetic things, HIV patients sometimes can get that with certain treatments, and certainly certain cancers that eat away at nerve roots, lower back issues. Those are nerve-mediated pain. It's a different quality. And in this sense, cannabis does not work to the same efficacy or extent that narcotics do, but it does have a significant difference compared to what we call placebos, or just what people might expect.
Thank you. We're actually in a minute here. We're getting booted out for class. So I want to ask Dr. Speth that same question just about the debilitating diseases.
Okay, yeah, I would like to add on this. There is very strong inferential data suggesting that marijuana would be good for PTSD. There was a drug called Ramonabant that was developed as a diet pill and also to help people stop smoking. It works through inhibiting the cannabinoid receptors for our endogenous cannabinoids. And what was found was that people who were taking this drug became suicidal, which suggests that the suicidality associated with PTSD might indeed be associated with a lack of endogenous cannabinoids, inadequate stimulation of the CB1 cannabinoid receptor, which could potentially be cured through the use of marijuana.
All right. Well, I want to thank our medical professionals here for participating. It's been great. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope you learned a lot today, and I hope that when you go to the voting booth, you're a little more educated now. Thank you.
As he mentioned, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. And again, I do hope that this was very beneficial to you. And let's give a round of applause for the College of Pharmacy for putting this on and taking it head on. Thank you all. And thank you to our moderator, Andrew Abramson. Thank you.